Growing up, there was a small graveyard at the edge of town. Overgrown, forgotten. My friends and I used to dare each other to spend a night there. I finally accepted. Lying among the crumbling stones, I noticed a fresh grave, one that hadn't been there before. My own name was carved into the marker. I laughed it off, until I noticed the date of death. It was that night, and as the wind howled, I heard soft, wet digging sounds just inches from where I lay. Next story. One night after work, I took a shortcut through a side alley. Halfway down, I realized it was eerily silent. No traffic, no voices, just the sound of my own breathing. And then a second set of footsteps, perfectly matching mine. I turned sharply, empty alley. Heart racing, I sprinted out. At home, I locked the doors, double-checked the windows. But when I sat down to breathe, I heard it again. Footsteps, pacing just outside my living room window. They stopped when I stopped breathing. Next story. At first, it was just small things. Misplaced keys, doors left slightly open. I blamed my own forgetfulness. But then I started waking up to the sound of someone whispering my name. I lived alone. One night, desperate, I set up my phone to record audio while I slept. The next morning, trembling, I listened. Hours of silence, until 3:17 a.m. A low, gravelly voice whispered, "Wake up." I'm here. That same night, I found deep scratches carved into my bedroom walls. Next story. My grandmother always warned me about the old mirror in her attic, saying it didn't reflect the real world. As a kid, I laughed it off. Years later, after she passed, I found myself drawn to it. Staring into the glass, I saw something strange. My reflection smiling when I wasn't. It beckoned. When I blinked, it was gone. I tried to leave, but the attic door wouldn't budge. In the mirror, my reflection stepped forward, hand reaching toward the glass, and I swear I felt cold fingers brush mine. Next story. During a hiking trip, my group found a weathered wooden sign, the Bath of Whispers. Intrigued, we followed it. The trees grew denser, the air colder. Then we heard it, faint voices urging us to keep going. One by one, my friends became distant, unresponsive, their eyes glassy. Only when I turned back, blocking out the whispers, did I escape. When I reported it later, the ranger just stared at me and said, "That path was closed 50 years ago, after a group vanished. None ever came back." Next story. Living in the city, noise is normal. But when all sound stopped, cars, birds, even the hum of electricity, I knew something was wrong. Outside, the world looked the same, but people were frozen mid-step, mid-breath, like mannequins. Only I could move. Panicking, I searched for anyone else, but the streets were endless and empty. Hours passed, days maybe. Finally, in a dusty alley, I met someone else, but their smile stretched too wide, and their voice cracked like broken glass when they said, "We've been waiting for you." Next story. My neighbor's little boy waved at the window every night. Sweet kid. I waved back. Until one night, his mother came over and asked if I had seen anything strange. I told her about the nightly waves. Her face went pale. She told me her son had died in that room 3 weeks ago. When she left, I stood at my window, heart pounding. Slowly, the curtains across the street pulled back, and the boy waved again, grinning wider than ever before. Next story. We moved into an old farmhouse, built in the 1800s. At first, the creaks and groans seemed normal, but soon we heard footsteps pacing at night, doors opening and closing on their own. One evening, I found muddy footprints leading up the stairs, child-sized, but no children lived nearby. We tried to bless the house, but during the prayer, every mirror shattered at once. We moved out after a month, but sometimes I still hear a child laughing under my bed. Next story. On a road trip through the desert, we picked up a hitchhiker, a pale woman with long black hair and no luggage. She barely spoke. When she finally did, her voice was so soft it was like the wind itself. She warned us not to stop until we saw the sun rise. We laughed it off, but when a thick, unnatural fog surrounded the car and something heavy slammed onto the roof, we kept driving, terrified. When the sun finally rose, the woman was gone, and on the dusty window was a single handprint, charred black. Next story. There's an old urban legend about a cursed song. If you listen to it, you die within 7 days. Dumb, right? My friends and I dared each other to find it online. We did. It was just static and low humming. Nothing scary. We joked and laughed until the calls started. Each night, a different voice. Distorted, sobbing, screaming. On the 7th night, I woke up to find every mirror in my house shattered, my phone cracked in half, and a note scrawled on my wall. You heard it. Now you belong to it. Every town has that one abandoned house kids dare each other to enter. Ours was the old Watterson place. I went inside once on a dare. Creaky floors, moldy smell, the works. But in the attic, I found a chair facing the corner and a tape recorder on the floor. Pressed play. A voice whispered, "Turn around." I didn't. I ran. Years later, I drove past and saw a figure in the attic window, still sitting in the chair, watching. Next story. When I moved into my new apartment, the previous tenant left behind an old clock. It didn't work. Hands frozen at 3:33 a.m. I thought it looked cool, so I kept it. A week later, I started waking up at exactly 3:33 every night, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. The clock, even unplugged, ticked loudly. One night, half asleep, I saw a shadow standing at the foot of my bed, pointing at the clock. I moved out 2 days later, leaving everything behind, except the clock, which somehow ended up packed with my things. Next story. There's a stretch of highway near my town where accidents happen more than anywhere else. Locals say it's cursed. I didn't believe it until I drove it one night alone. Thick fog rolled in and figures appeared by the roadside, waving frantically. When I stopped, they vanished. A whisper filled the car. "Keep going." As I sped off, I saw it, a twisted wreck of a car, just like mine, headlights shattered, an exact mirror image. When I looked in my rearview mirror, the figures were running after me. Next story. The abandoned hospital outside town was a magnet for thrill seekers. My friends and I dared each other to spend a night there. Inside, graffiti covered the walls. Beds were rusted, and the smell of rot filled the air. We laughed until we heard it, soft sobbing echoing through the halls. We followed it, thinking it was a prank. Instead, we found a wheelchair rolling slowly down the hallway, empty, except for bloody handprints smeared across the seat. Next story. When my dog started barking at the basement door every night, I thought it was just animals down there. But one night, the barking turned into whimpering. When I opened the door, my dog bolted upstairs. I went down with a flashlight. Halfway down, I felt a cold hand wrap around my ankle. I fell, shining the light around. No one there. On the wall, scratched deep into the stone, was one word: stay. Next story. At a flea market, I bought an old Polaroid camera. I loved the vintage feel, but when I developed the first batch of photos, I noticed something strange. In every picture, a dark figure loomed behind me, getting closer with each snap. I stopped using it, locked it away. Weeks later, I woke up to find fresh Polaroids scattered across my bed. New pictures taken while I slept. In the last photo, the figure was standing right beside my bed. Next story. My sister used to have an imaginary friend named Tommy. She'd talk to him, play with him. We thought it was harmless. But one day, she told my mom that Tommy didn't want her to live with us anymore. That night, we woke to her screaming. Her room was trashed, toys smashed, curtains torn down. She had scratches down her arms. After that, she never spoke of Tommy again. Years later, while remodeling, we found a name carved into the wall behind her bed. Tommy. Next story. While camping deep in the woods, my friends and I stumbled upon an abandoned campsite. Old tents, a cold fire pit, food still in cans. No one in sight. We joked that it felt like they vanished mid-meal. That night, strange noises surrounded us. Snapping branches, whispered voices. In the morning, we packed to leave, but found our gear shredded, claw marks everywhere. As we fled, I glanced back and saw a shadow, tall and lanky, standing exactly where our tents had been. Next story. A package arrived at my door with no return address. Just a small, unmarked VHS tape. Curiosity got the best of me. I found an old player and watched it. Grainy footage showed my house. From the outside, from the inside, from the bedroom. Someone had been filming me for weeks. Panicked, I checked every inch of my home. Found hidden cameras behind vents, inside light fixtures. I moved the next day, but sometimes I still get packages, blank, waiting. Next story. After my grandfather died, we inherited his farm. While clearing out his barn, I found a locked hatch in the floor. After hours of struggling, I got it open. Below was a cramped, dark room filled with old furniture and a mirror facing the hatch. As I leaned over, I saw movement, but not mine. Something in the reflection reached out, grasping for the opening. I slammed it shut. But that night, I heard banging from under the floorboards, louder and louder until dawn. When I moved into my new apartment, I noticed a small door in the back of the closet. It was sealed shut with nails and tape. Curiosity got the better of me one night, and I pried it open. Behind it was a narrow tunnel, leading into darkness. I crawled in with a flashlight. The walls were covered in scratch marks. About 20 feet in, I found a small room and a mirror facing the tunnel entrance. In the reflection, something was standing behind me. Next story. My dog started barking at the same corner of the living room every night at 11 p.m. He would growl, bare his teeth, and refuse to move until I physically carried him away. One night, I set up a camera. Reviewing the footage, I expected nothing. But at exactly 11:003, a tall, gaunt figure slid into view from the ceiling, upside down, watching us. The next night, I moved out. Next story. There was a man who stood across the street every night, just staring at my house. I called the police. By the time they arrived, he was gone. I installed motion-activated lights, but they would flicker and die when he appeared. One night, he walked across the street. I locked every door and window. But then, I heard footsteps inside the house, coming from upstairs. Next story, I downloaded a meditation app to help me sleep. One night, halfway through a session, the soft voice said, "Now, breathe in, and look behind you. I froze. The voice wasn't part of the normal recording. I deleted the app immediately, but every night since, I still hear that voice, closer and closer to my ear. Next story. After a long shift, I got into my car and started driving home. But the streets didn't look right. Familiar landmarks were twisted, stretched into grotesque versions of themselves. I tried turning around, but the road just kept going forward, deeper into a place that wasn't my city. I only made it back when I closed my eyes and drove blindly, trusting the feeling that something was guiding me home. Next story. My daughter had an imaginary friend named Mr. Smiles. She said he lived under her bed. Harmless, I thought, until I found deep claw marks gouged into the wooden floorboards. One night, I woke to her giggling downstairs. I found her sitting alone in the dark, staring into nothing. She turned to me and whispered, "Mr. Smiles said you're next." Next story. I found an old camera at a flea market. The seller practically threw it at me, begging me to take it. That night, I developed the film inside. Every photo was of me, sleeping, eating, working, in places I'd never been to before. In the last photo, I was staring directly into the lens, and someone else's hand was on my shoulder. Next story. During a severe storm, I lost power and sat by candlelight. I noticed my reflection in the window smiling, even though I wasn't. I turned away. When I looked back, the reflection was gone. Minutes later, a tap came from the closet door behind me. I didn't open it. I didn't move. I just sat there, listening to the faint, steady breathing from inside. Next story, I used to hear tapping on my window at night, but brushed it off as tree branches. Until I cut the tree down, the tapping continued. I tried ignoring it, until one night, it became pounding. I looked outside and saw a pale face grinning back at me, hands pressed against the glass. I live on the 10th floor. Next story. Working late one evening, I stayed alone at the office. Around midnight, I heard the copier whir to life. It printed a single page. On it was a grainy photo of me, taken from above, hands on the keyboard. I looked up and saw a figure dangling from the ceiling tiles, its mouth open in a soundless scream. Next story. After my grandfather passed away, I inherited his old farmhouse. I moved in, trying to bring life back to the dusty place. The first night, I heard footsteps upstairs. I shrugged it off. Old houses make sounds. But every night, the steps became more deliberate. One evening, I stood at the bottom of the stairs and asked, "Who's there?" A cold breath touched my ear, and a whisper answered, "I live here." Next story. I often take late walks to clear my mind. One night, passing by an empty playground, I saw the swings moving wildly. No wind, no sound. A shadowy figure sat at the top of the slide, unmoving. I walked faster, refusing to look back. When I finally dared to glance over my shoulder, the entire playground was still, empty. But my own shadow wasn't following me anymore. Next story. A man moved into the apartment next door. He never spoke, never left. But every night, I heard faint scratching sounds coming through the wall we shared. One night, the noise grew louder. Urgent, frantic scratching. I knocked on the wall. It went silent. The next morning, his unit was empty, abandoned. The landlord said no one had rented it for over a year. My friends dared me to explore the abandoned hospital at the edge of town. Inside, graffiti covered the walls, and broken glass crunched underfoot. I wandered alone into an operating room and found an old, rusted wheelchair facing the corner. As I turned to leave, the chair spun around, as if someone invisible was sitting in it. I didn't wait to find out. Next story. A new neighbor moved into the house across the street. She always wore the same dress, always stood at her window, staring. One night, I waved. She didn't move. A week later, I saw a moving truck in front of her house. The real owner returning from vacation. The house had been empty the whole time. The woman at the window disappeared the moment he stepped inside. Next story. At the annual town fair, a fortune teller grabbed my hand and gasped. She muttered something about darkness clinging to me. I laughed it off, but that night, shadows in my home grew longer, deeper. They moved when I wasn't looking, sometimes even when I was. I tried cleansing rituals, prayers. Nothing worked. The darkness had already decided it belonged to me. Next story. In my dreams, I kept seeing an endless hallway lined with doors. Each night, I opened another. Some revealed happy memories, others, nightmares. One door was locked every night. Finally, in one dream, I found the key. As I turned the lock, I heard a voice behind me. Some things are better left closed. I woke up screaming, and the doorknob to my bedroom was slowly turning on its own. Next story. While hiking in the woods, I found a small clearing filled with old, rotting dolls tied to the trees. As I backed away, I tripped over something soft, a freshly dug grave, unmarked. When I scrambled up, the dolls' heads were turned, all facing me. I ran until my lungs burned. But even now, sometimes I find small doll limbs on my doorstep. Next story. At an estate sale, I bought a mirror framed in ornate gold. It looked ancient and beautiful. At home, I noticed that my reflection always lagged a second behind. At first, it was amusing. Then, one night, my reflection smiled. But I hadn't. I smashed the mirror, but sometimes I catch glimpses of that same smirking figure in windows, puddles, even blank TV screens. Next story. The daycare center I worked at had an old, unused basement. Kids often said they heard laughing from below. One rainy afternoon, I followed the sound and found a trapdoor under the carpet. When I opened it, the laughter stopped. I shined a flashlight down and saw dozens of tiny handprints along the walls. The basement was empty, except for a rocking horse gently swaying on its own. Next story. There was a house in my neighborhood. Kids dared each other to approach. Its windows were boarded up, the yard overgrown. One Halloween night, we mustered enough courage to creep up to the porch. As I reached for the doorknob, it turned on its own. The door opened just a crack, enough to see a single eye staring back at me. We bolted. When we told the police, they found the house empty. No footprints but ours. Next story. Every morning, my alarm clock would go off at 3:03 a.m., no matter how many times I'd reset it. One night, tired of it, I smashed the clock. Still, at 3:03, I woke up to the feeling of someone breathing against my face. I lay paralyzed as invisible fingers brushed across my neck. When dawn came, bruises shaped like fingerprints ringed my throat. Next, when my grandmother died, she left me her locket. She told me it would keep me safe. I wore it everywhere. One evening, walking home, I noticed a man following me. He stayed just far enough behind that I couldn't see his face. As I passed under a street lamp, the locket grew hot against my chest. Suddenly, the man stumbled and screamed, as if pushed. When I looked back, he was gone. Next, during a storm, the power went out. I lit candles, trying to stay calm. In the flickering light, I saw a shadow move across the wall, but no one else was home. The shadow grew closer, stretching from wall to wall. It whispered my name in a voice I didn't recognize. When the lights finally came back on, All the candles had been snuffed out, and I was no longer alone. Next, a friend gave me an old camera, one that used film instead of digital memory. I snapped a few shots around town for fun. When the photos developed, everyone showed a tall, blurred figure standing just behind me. I hadn't seen anyone at the time. The more pictures I took, the closer the figure seemed to get. I stopped using the camera, but sometimes, in reflections, I still catch glimpses of him. Next, I moved into a new apartment, small but cozy. Everything seemed fine, until I started hearing soft knocking behind the walls at night. Plaster cracked in the corners. One evening, a section of the wall crumbled away, revealing a hidden crawl space. Inside was a single dusty chair and a pair of wide, watching eyes. When I called the landlord, he swore the building had no crawl spaces. Camping in the woods with friends, we sat around the fire telling scary stories. Just for fun, someone suggested we call out into the forest. If anyone's there, come join us. Laughter followed, but minutes later, we heard heavy footsteps circling just beyond the firelight. We never saw who or what it was. We left everything behind and ran. When we returned the next day, the fire pit was still warm and fresh footprints surrounded it. Next story. Working late at the library, I noticed a strange book on my desk. I hadn't checked it out. The title read, Your Last Days. Inside were detailed entries about my life, events, thoughts, even dreams no one could know. The final entry was dated tomorrow, ending abruptly with the words, It comes tonight. I quit my job and moved to another city, but sometimes I find that same book waiting for me in strange places. Next story. I loved the little antique music box I found at the market. It played a soft, eerie lullaby. At night, it would sometimes start playing on its own. I laughed it off, blaming old springs and loose gears, until one evening, when it played a tune I hadn't heard before. Slow, haunting, almost like a warning. I smashed the box, but at night, that unfamiliar song still echoes faintly from somewhere deep inside my house. Next story. My brother used to talk about his imaginary friend, a tall man in a wide-brimmed hat who visited him at night. We laughed it off, until one night, years later, I woke to see a figure matching that description standing at the foot of my bed. Frozen with fear, I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them again, he was gone, but muddy footprints led from my bed all the way to the front door. Next story. My childhood home always had a strange chill in the basement. My parents blamed it on bad insulation. One day, cleaning old boxes, I found a small locked door behind a shelf. Curious, I pried it open. Inside was a bricked-up alcove. Scratched into the stone were dozens of handprints, small, child-sized. That night, I heard whispers rising from the basement, soft, pleading, calling my name. Next story. After moving into my new house, I started noticing random bruises on my arms and legs. I brushed it off until the morning I woke up with my bed dragged halfway across the room. Deep scratches marred the wooden floor. There was no explanation. When I reviewed footage from a nanny cam I had set up for my dog, I saw the horrifying truth. My sleeping body being pulled across the room by unseen hands. Next story. There's a road outside town that's supposedly haunted. Locals say if you drive it alone at midnight, you'll see a woman in white by the roadside. Curious, I tried it. Sure enough, a figure appeared, waving for a ride. Against better judgment, I stopped. She slid into the passenger seat without opening the door. I didn't dare look at her. At the next crossroads, she vanished. leaving behind a puddle of ice-cold water on the seat. Next story. My phone rang one night, displaying my own number. Confused, I answered. A distorted version of my own voice whispered, "Don't trust the one who knocks." Heart racing, I locked all the doors. Moments later, there was a knock. Soft, insistent. I didn't answer. In the morning, I found scratch marks all around my front door, deep and wild, as if someone, or something, had desperately tried to get inside. Next story. Volunteering to watch an elderly neighbor's cat seemed easy enough, but from the moment I stepped into her creaky old house, I felt watched. The cat hissed constantly at empty corners. One night, while refilling his bowl, the cat froze, staring at something behind me. I turned slowly to find a figure, translucent and weeping, floating near the ceiling. The cat never went back into that house, and neither did I. Next story. After inheriting an antique mirror from a distant relative, strange things started happening. Glimpses of movement in the reflection. Figures standing behind me that vanished when I turned around. Worst was when my reflection didn't move exactly when I did. It lagged, smiling when I wasn't. One night, it pressed its hand against the glass from the other side. I covered the mirror with a sheet and buried it deep in the attic. Next story. While hiking alone, I found an old, abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. Inside, it was filled with dusty furniture and broken windows. As I explored, I noticed a diary on the table. Flipping through, I realized the entries were describing my movements, my hike, my clothes, even what I had for breakfast. The last entry simply read, "He finally found me." That's when I heard footsteps behind me. A new neighbor moved into the apartment next door, but I never saw him. Only heard strange noises at odd hours. One evening, I saw a dark figure standing at the edge of my balcony, staring into my living room. When I rushed outside, no one was there. The next day, the landlord told me something that made my blood run cold. The unit next door had been vacant for years. Next story. Scrolling through an old online forum, I found a thread titled simply, "Do you remember me?" It was full of posts from people describing dreams, where a smiling man with no eyes appeared. I thought it was a joke, until that night, when I dreamed of a man in a tattered suit, smiling with an empty face. I woke up gasping, only to find muddy footprints at the foot of my bed. Next story. There's a lighthouse near my town that's been abandoned for decades. They say the light still shines during heavy fog, even though it's been disconnected. One stormy night, I saw it flash from the cliffs. Drawn by curiosity, I hiked up. Through the mist, I heard distant voices calling for help. But when I reached the lighthouse, it was dark, cold, and empty, and the heavy door slammed shut behind me. Next story. When I bought an old typewriter at a flea market, I thought it would be a fun decoration. But when I set it up at home, I found sheets of paper already loaded inside, filled with frantic typing, warnings, and desperate pleas. I assumed it was a prank, until one night, while I was sleeping, the keys clattered loudly on their own. The new page simply said, "They found me again." Next story. A friend dared me to spend a night at the abandoned hospital on the edge of town. I laughed it off, figuring it would be easy. Midnight crept in, and I wandered the dark halls, flashlight cutting through the dust. Then the lights flickered. I heard faint murmuring, wheels squeaking, like a gurney being pushed. I hid in a closet. Through the cracked door, I watched as shadowy nurses ruled something heavy past, something wrapped in blood-soaked sheets. Next story. Growing up, my grandfather always warned me never to fish in the old quarry pond. He said something lived down there. I laughed at his ghost stories until one evening, curious and rebellious, I cast a line. The water rippled. Then a pale, bony hand grabbed the line and tugged back. I dropped the rod and ran. To this day, sometimes at night, I dream about something cold and slimy slithering onto the shore, still searching for me. Next story. When my sister moved into her new apartment, she started getting strange mail. Letters with no return address, always warning her about the woman in the mirror. At first, we joked about it, until one night, she FaceTimed me, crying. Behind her, reflected in the dark window, I saw a figure, a woman with hollow eyes, standing close behind her, smiling. Next story, I bought an old camera at a garage sale. It came with a roll of undeveloped film inside. Curiosity got the better of me, and I had it processed. The photos were strange. Dark woods, abandoned houses, blurry figures watching from the trees. The last photo made my heart stop. It was my backyard, taken at night, with someone or something standing at my bedroom window. Next story. After a bad storm, a new tree appeared overnight in the field behind my house. Tall, gnarled, and out of place. Animals refused to go near it. Birds avoided flying over it. One evening, I watched from my porch as a neighbor's dog wandered too close. The tree's branches bent unnaturally low, wrapping around the dog and pulling it into the trunk. The next morning, the tree was gone, leaving only a circle of scorched earth. Next story. There was a library in my hometown, rumored to have a forbidden section. Books that could drive a reader insane. As a teenager, I broke into the restricted area. Most of the shelves were empty, except for a single leather-bound volume sitting on a pedestal. I flipped it open. The pages were filled with descriptions of events that hadn't happened yet, until they did, one by one. The last prediction was dated tomorrow, and it described my death. Next story. One night, driving home through thick fog, I took a wrong turn and ended up in a part of town I didn't recognize. The houses were crumbling, windows dark, the streets eerily empty. I turned around, but the road looped back to the same street, every time. When I finally stopped to ask for help, the figures that emerged from the shadows weren't human. I floored it and didn't stop until the sun rose and the fog finally cleared. Next story. During a hiking trip, I stumbled upon an ancient stone well deep in the forest, covered in moss and vines. Peering inside, I heard faint singing, a soft melodic voice calling my name. My friends said they heard nothing. That night at camp, I dreamed of someone climbing out of the well, inching closer to our tents. When I woke up, muddy footprints surrounded the campsite, leading to my sleeping bag. Every year on my birthday, I received an anonymous gift, a black candle and a note saying, "1 year closer." I thought it was some weird prank, but on my 25th birthday, the candle lit itself at midnight, and the note this time simply read, "Time's up." That night, I dreamed of a hooded figure standing at the foot of my bed, silent, patient, waiting. Next story, I started hearing tapping at my window every night. At first, I thought it was just the wind. Then I realized the tapping only happened around 3 a.m., and only when the moon was full. One night, I worked up the nerve to pull back the curtains. I expected a branch, or maybe a bird. Instead, I saw a pale face pressed against the glass. Wide eyes, smiling mouth, tapping with long, claw-like fingers. I live on the 3rd floor. Next story, cleaning out my grandmother's attic after she passed away. I found a locked chest with a simple brass key taped to it. Inside were dozens of Polaroids, all of them showing the same three children standing in front of an unfamiliar house. But in every photo, the children looked a little wrong. Their faces elongated, their smiles stretched unnaturally. The last photo showed the children standing in my grandmother's kitchen, with the date marked just 2 days before she died. Next story. While on vacation at a coastal town, I rented a small cabin on the edge of the cliffs. Every night, I heard scratching noises beneath the floorboards, like something trying to dig its way up. I told the owner, but he just smiled oddly and said, "Don't worry." They usually lose interest by the third night. I didn't stay to find out what they were. I packed up and left before sunset. Next story. My roommate moved out unexpectedly, claiming the apartment was cursed. I shrugged it off until I found the words, "Get out," carved under the kitchen table. Then came the dreams. Vivid nightmares of a man standing at the foot of my bed, whispering things I couldn't remember when I woke up. The final straw was waking up one night to find every door and window in the apartment wide open, and muddy footprints leading from my bedroom door to the front exit. Next story. A new neighbor moved into the apartment above me. Late at night, I'd hear him pacing back and forth, sometimes muttering. One evening, I decided to introduce myself. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. An old woman living next door poked her head out and said, "No one's lived there in years, dear." I laughed nervously, thinking she was mistaken. That night, I heard the heavy footsteps again, but this time, they stopped directly above my bed. Next story. On my morning jog through the woods, I found an old rusted merry-go-round, half buried under fallen leaves. Curious, I gave it a push. As it creaked into motion, a cold breeze blew, and I heard children's laughter all around me, though the woods were empty. I ran home, but every night after that, I'd hear the faint sound of a creaking merry-go-round spinning somewhere nearby, even though I lived miles from the forest. Next story. I was volunteering at an animal shelter when we received a stray cat with strange, spiraling patterns in its fur. No one could figure out where it came from. Whenever someone looked too long into its eyes, they'd get dizzy, sometimes even faint. The cat would always be gone by the time they woke up. And later, those people would report seeing strange symbols scratched into the walls of their homes. Symbols matching the patterns on the cat. Next story. When I moved into my new house, the real estate agent mentioned a secret basement, but warned it was better left alone. Naturally, I had to explore it. The stairs creaked as I descended. The basement was empty, except for a single ancient rocking chair in the middle. It was already gently rocking when I stepped in, and when I turned to leave, I saw my reflection in the dusty mirror on the wall, but it wasn't moving the same way I was. Next story. Growing up, my family always avoided the old orchard at the back of our property. They said the trees were cursed. One summer, bored and skeptical, I wandered in. The trees were twisted and blackened, yet full of gleaming red apples. I picked one, bit into it, and tasted ash and something metallic. That night, I woke to the sensation of something rooting itself deep inside my stomach, tendrils writhing under my skin. The orchard never let go of what it fed. Next story. My sister loved antique dolls. Her collection filled shelves in her room, their glassy eyes always watching. After she moved away, I stayed in her room. That's when I noticed Sometimes I'd find a doll on the bed that I knew I hadn't touched. Other times, they'd be turned to face the door, like they were waiting for someone. The final straw was waking up with one of them cradled against my chest, its tiny porcelain hand resting over my heart. At first, the figure outside my window looked like a scarecrow. Ragged clothes, arms limp at its sides, standing motionless in the cornfield behind my house. I told myself it was just a decoration, but every morning it had moved closer and closer. After a week, it stood right by my bedroom window. I called the police, but when they arrived, the field was empty. That night, I locked every door and window. Still, at 3 a.m., I woke up to the soft sound of breathing at the foot of my bed. Next story. The town library had a forbidden section, an old locked room no one was allowed to enter. One rainy afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I picked the lock and slipped inside. Dust coated everything. In the center, an ancient book sat open on a pedestal. As I stepped closer, the pages flipped on their own, and the words started shifting, rearranging into sentences that spelled out my own name and the date of my death. Next story. While babysitting for a new family, I noticed the toddler kept waving at the corner of the room and giggling. Harmless, I thought. Kids have vivid imaginations. But later that night, after putting him to bed, I heard two voices on the baby monitor, his tiny voice, and a deep, growling one answering back. When I ran into the room, the child was asleep, but the closet door was swinging shut. Next story. My grandfather always told me not to go down into the root cellar alone. He said, old things live down there, things that remembered. I laughed it off until the day I had to retrieve some canned goods. It was dark and musty, and I swear I heard faint voices whispering my name. When I climbed back up, the hatch slammed shut behind me. It took my family 3 hours to find me, even though they swore they heard my pounding the entire time. Next story. The elevator in my building sometimes skipped the lobby and took you straight to the basement, a grim, abandoned floor with crumbling walls and old, broken furniture. It happened to me one evening. I tried pressing every button, but the doors stayed stubbornly closed. When they finally slid open, the hallway was pitch black, and I heard footsteps coming toward me. I didn't wait. I shoved the doors open with my hands and bolted back upstairs, vowing never to ride that elevator again. Next story. On a family camping trip deep in the woods, my little brother wandered off. We searched for hours until we found him standing at the tree line, smiling strangely. He claimed a man made of mist had been showing him secret paths through the forest. That night, around the campfire, he pointed into the trees and said, "There he is." We all turned to look. Just beyond the firelight, a tall, thin shape lingered, watching silently before melting into the darkness. Next story. A new art gallery opened downtown. One of the exhibits was a large black canvas. Nothing on it, just pure darkness. But as I stood in front of it, staring, I started to feel watched. The shadows seemed to pulse, to move. I stepped closer, hypnotized. Just before I touched the canvas, a cold hand grabbed my wrist from inside the painting. I screamed and stumbled backward. The next day, the gallery was boarded up, and no one remembered it ever being there. Next story. During a long road trip, I stopped at a small roadside diner. The food was cheap, and the staff were overly polite, almost robotic. As I ate, I noticed every patron had the exact same smile. Wide, fixed, unnerving. When I asked for the restroom, the waitress just pointed to a door marked exit. Something about her eyes told me not to argue. I left without finishing my meal. And when I looked back, the diner was gone. Just an empty patch of cracked asphalt. Next story. Growing up, we had an old radio that sometimes picked up strange stations at night. Voices speaking in languages we didn't recognize. Music that sounded warped and broken. One night, I stayed up late turning the dial. I found a station playing a distorted lullaby. Between the notes, I heard a faint whisper, "Come outside." I didn't, but the next morning, muddy footprints circled the house. Small, barefoot prints leading right up to my bedroom window. Next story. My girlfriend's grandfather left her a mirror in his will, claiming it had been in the family for generations. We hung it in the living room. At first, it seemed harmless. But then, we started seeing things in the reflection, shapes moving behind us, even when we were alone. Once, I watched myself grin in the mirror, while my real face stayed frozen in terror. We covered the mirror with a blanket. Still, at night, we could hear faint giggles coming from under the cloth. A storm rolled in late one night, heavy rain lashing against the windows. I was alone, reading in bed, when the power went out. I lit a few candles and tried to ignore the way the house creaked under the wind. But then, I heard a knock at the front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I peered through the peephole and saw nothing. But when I turned around, muddy footprints led from the door to the middle of my living room. Next story. The old amusement park had been abandoned for decades, but one night, my friends dared me to sneak inside. The rides were rusted skeletons in the dark, the carnival games covered in mold. As I wandered through the rotting midway, I heard the faint sound of a calliope playing. Following the music, I found the carousel, still spinning, lights flickering weakly. Every painted horse had a face twisted in agony, and riding them were pale figures with hollow eyes, slowly turning to look at me. Next story, I took a job at a small gas station in the middle of nowhere. The manager gave me one rule: no matter what, don't open the back door after midnight. It sounded ridiculous until my second night there, when I heard a frantic pounding from the back. A woman's voice, sobbing for help. I almost gave in. But something in the way she kept repeating the same words, in the exact same tone, over and over, convinced me to stay put. The next morning, there were deep claw marks gouged into the metal door. Next story, a box arrived on my porch with no return address. Inside was an old camcorder and a single tape labeled "Watch Alone." Against my better judgment, I played it. At first, it just showed footage of a wooded area, nothing unusual. But then the cameraman turned the lens toward the trees, and I saw myself standing there, staring straight into the camera, even though I had never been to those woods before. Next story. Every night at exactly 2:33 a.m., my phone would buzz with a new message. Always a single word: closer. At first, I thought it was a glitch or some sick prank. But every night, the word changed slightly. Near. Next door. Inside. One night, I woke up to find the final text: behind you. I didn't turn around. I just ran. Next story. After moving into an old farmhouse, I started having the same dream every night of wandering through the dark woods, following a faint, glowing figure. When I finally found the courage to explore the property, I stumbled across a tiny, forgotten cemetery behind the barn. In the center stood a cracked gravestone, the name worn away. At the base, I found a locket containing a picture of myself, though the photo was clearly over 100 years old. Next story, I found a dusty board game in the attic of my childhood home. It looked homemade, with pieces carved from bone and a warning scrawled across the box. Never finished the game. My friends and I played for fun, but strange things started happening. Injuries matching the cards we drew, nightmares bleeding into real life. When we realized how close we were to finishing, it was too late. The final piece clicked into place, and we heard a slow knock at the door. Something was coming to collect. Next story. While hiking alone through the mountains, I got hopelessly lost. Just as night fell, I spotted a cabin through the trees, light spilling from its windows. Grateful, I approached. An old woman welcomed me inside, offered me food, a warm bed. But something felt off. The house was too quiet, the shadows too deep. In the middle of the night, I woke to find dozens of other travelers staring silently at me, their eyes blank, their mouths sewn shut. Next story, I bought an antique clock at a flea market. A beautiful brass piece that chimed sweetly on the hour. But soon, I noticed the clock striking at odd times. 1:13, 3:17, 4:04. Always different, always random. When I researched the times, my blood ran cold. They all matched exact moments when tragedies had struck in my town's history, and one upcoming date and time matched my own birthday. Next story. One evening, my best friend told me he was being stalked by his own reflection. It sounded absurd, until I saw it too. In mirrors, windows, even puddles, his reflection would lag behind, smiling wickedly while he looked terrified. He tried covering every reflective surface, but eventually, it didn't matter. His reflection stepped out of the mirror one night, and he was never seen again. Next story. After moving into my new apartment, I kept hearing soft tapping sounds at night. I assumed it was the pipes or the wind. But then, I realized the tapping always came from the same spot, my closet. One night, determined to prove it was nothing, I stayed up and waited. At exactly 3 a.m., the door slowly creaked open. Inside, carved into the back wall, was a message. Let me out. I volunteered at a local animal shelter for some extra cash. One night, while closing up, I noticed a small black cat staring at me through the bars. It meowed once, and suddenly, I blacked out. When I woke up, it was morning, and the shelter was deserted. Every cage was open, every animal gone. The only thing left behind was the black cat, now sitting on the front desk, staring with human-like eyes. Next story. A man moved into the house next door. I never really saw him, just a faint silhouette moving behind the curtains. Every night, the same pattern, lights flickering on, shadows pacing. Until one evening when the police arrived. They told me the house had been abandoned for years. But as I stood on my porch, I saw the curtain shift again and a hand press against the glass. Next story. During a family camping trip, my younger brother wandered into the woods and didn't come back. Hours turned into days of searching. But then, one evening, he walked out of the forest, looking exactly the same, but somehow wrong. His eyes were too still. His smile didn't reach his eyes. And at night, I heard him whispering in a voice that wasn't his. Next story. There's an old bridge in my hometown that no one dares cross after dark. They say, if you stop in the middle and look into the river, you'll see your reflection smile back, even if you aren't smiling. One reckless night, I tested the legend. I stared into the black water, and saw a second version of myself grinning up at me, eyes wide, mouth splitting too far open. When I looked away, I wasn't sure which one of us had stepped back onto the bridge. Next story, I used to love taking long drives at night. No destination in mind. One evening, I found myself on an unfamiliar dirt road, surrounded by towering trees. The road narrowed until it disappeared altogether, forcing me to stop. That's when I noticed dozens of figures standing between the trees, pale, unmoving, their faces hidden by old crumbling masks. I reversed as fast as I could, but the road seemed endless, and no matter how far I drove, they stayed just outside the headlights, waiting. Next story. A friend dared me to download a mysterious app called The Countdown. It promised to predict the exact moment of your death. Laughing, I installed it. The timer started. 3 days, 5 hours, 22 minutes. At first, it was a joke. But as the deadline approached, strange accidents started happening. A car narrowly missed me. A fire alarm went off in the middle of the night. When there were only minutes left, I locked myself in my room. But when the clock hit 0, there was a knock at the door. Next story. While house sitting for my aunt, I found an old, locked room upstairs. She had warned me never to enter it, but the temptation was too much. One night, I picked the lock and found nothing, just dust and empty walls. Relieved, I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. And in the faint reflection of the dusty mirror across the room, I saw dozens of shadowy figures crowding around me, whispering my name. Next story. When my grandfather died, he left me his pocket watch, a heavy, old-fashioned thing that ticked loudly. But soon after I brought it home, I started seeing glimpses of him out of the corner of my eye. At first, it was comforting. Then he started appearing in mirrors behind me. In reflections, he didn't look like the gentleman I remembered. His smile was wrong, his eyes were empty, and every night, the ticking got louder until it drowned out every other sound. Next story. My job at the hotel was simple. Work the night shift, check in the occasional traveler, and stay awake. One stormy night, a woman arrived soaked to the bone, asking for a room. I gave her a key. Hours later, the security cameras glitched. When I checked the tapes, I saw myself handing a room key to thin air. There had been no woman, and when I opened the room she supposedly stayed in, it was freezing cold and covered in muddy footprints. Next story. I started getting random packages delivered to my house. No return address, no notes, just strange objects. A cracked mirror, an old key, a feather stained red. At first, I thought it was a prank. Then one night, a final package arrived. Inside was a small, handwritten note. You've been chosen. That night, I heard footsteps pacing outside my window. When I called the police, they found nothing, except a pile of red feathers at my doorstep. Next story. As a child, I had an imaginary friend named Eddie. He was funny, mischievous, and I thought, harmless. But after I turned 10, he disappeared from my mind. Decades later, when I moved back into my childhood home, strange things started happening. Doors slamming, furniture moving, and on the bathroom mirror, written in steam, "Miss me." It wasn't just imagination this time. Eddie was back, and he wasn't playing anymore.